Welcome to Phantom Futures. Today we talk about the last city in the sky, survival above the clouds in 2157. There are moments in human history when everything changes, when the world as we know it ceases to exist and something entirely new must be born from the ashes of what was lost. The year 2157 marks such a moment, not because of war or alien invasion or cosmic catastrophe, but because Earth's surface became uninhabitable through our own slow, methodical destruction of the only home we'd ever known. But this isn't a story about ending, it's a story about adaptation, about humanity's incredible capacity to survive against impossible odds, and about the last floating city that represents our species' final stand above a world we can no longer touch. Welcome to Etheria, the last city in the sky, where 30 million souls live suspended between the toxic hell below and the infinite void above, where every breath is manufactured, every drop of water recycled, and every decision carries the weight of species survival. The city stretches for miles in every direction, an impossible amalgamation of engineering brilliance and desperate improvisation, floating at exactly 45,000 feet above what used to be the Pacific Ocean. From a distance, if anyone could get far enough away to see it, Etheria would look like a massive floating island, its underside bristling with thousands of gravity pulse generators that keep millions of tons of steel, concrete, greenhouses, and humanity suspended in defiance of natural law. The upper surface is a maze of buildings that climb toward the sky in spirals and curves, architecture that had to be completely reimagined when the constraint of ground-level foundations disappeared. Gardens cascade down the sides of residential towers, not for aesthetics but for oxygen production, every plant serving dual purpose as decoration and life support. The streets, if you can call them that, exist on multiple levels connected by tubes and platforms, creating a three-dimensional city where up and down have lost some of their traditional meaning. At the city's heart rises the spire, a central tower that extends another 10,000 feet above the main platform, topped with solar arrays that drink in sunlight above the cloud layer, converting stellar energy into the electricity that powers everything from the gravity generators to the water purifiers to the artificial lights that simulate day and night for a population that hasn't seen natural ground in 2 generations. Captain Elena Vasquez stands at the observation deck on level 247 of the spire, looking down at the city she's sworn to protect as head of Etheria's defense force. At 47 years old, she's one of the oldest people in the city, part of the generation that remembers the surface, that lived through the exodus when the atmospheric toxicity reached levels that made ground dwelling impossible. Her memories of Earth below are fragmentary now, distorted by time and trauma, images of green fields turning brown, rivers running black, the sky itself changing color from blue to a sickly yellow-orange that burned the eyes and lungs. She remembers the chaos of the evacuation, millions trying to reach the construction platforms where the sky cities were being built, not nearly enough space for everyone, the horrible calculus of who got to survive based on skills, genetics, random lottery, and in too many cases, simple wealth and privilege. She remembers leaving her younger brother behind because he had asthma, because the selection committee deemed him a liability for life in thin atmosphere, remembers watching through the platform's transparent floor as the ground receded and her brother became a dot, then nothing, lost among the masses of humanity that didn't make the cut. Those memories fuel her now as she monitors the threat board, a holographic display showing everything that could go wrong with a city that exists in fundamental violation of how humans are supposed to live. The gravity generators, any one of which could fail and send entire districts plummeting toward the poisoned surface. The oxygen farms, delicate ecosystems of genetically modified algae and super-efficient plants that produce breathable air for 30 million people, always one disease or pest away from catastrophic failure. the water reclamation systems that extract moisture from clouds, purify it through filters that need constant maintenance, because in Etheria every drop of water has been through hundreds of bodies before, a cycle of consumption and reclamation that nobody likes to think about too deeply. The solar arrays that must track the sun with perfect precision, because even an hour without power would start a cascade of systems failures that could doom them all. And perhaps most concerning, the food production facilities where lab-grown proteins and hydroponic vegetables struggle to provide adequate nutrition for a population that's been slowly developing deficiencies that doctors don't fully understand, children being born with bones that aren't quite dense enough, immune systems that aren't quite robust enough, adaptation or degeneration depending on who you ask. But today Elena's attention is focused on a different kind of threat, one that's been growing for months and threatens to tear Etheria apart from within. The city has split into factions, something that happens periodically when resources get scarce and fear overrides reason. The Grounders, a radical group that believes humanity's only path forward is to return to the surface, to adapt or genetically modify ourselves to survive the toxic atmosphere rather than continuing to live in artificial suspension. The Ascenders, equally radical, who argue the opposite, that Etheria should use its remaining resources to boost itself even higher, to break atmosphere entirely and become a generation ship heading for Mars or beyond, abandoning Earth completely. And the Sustainers, the majority faction that includes Elena, who believe the only realistic option is to maintain the city exactly as it is, to hold on and hope that someday, somehow, the surface will heal enough to allow return. The tension between these groups has escalated from philosophical debate to violence, with sabotage attempts on critical systems, assassinations of factional leaders, and most recently, a bombing in the Market District that killed 17 people and injured hundreds. The Market District, located on levels 87 through 94, is where Elena heads next, descending through the city via a gravity tube that allows controlled falling between levels. The market is controlled chaos even on good days, the economic heart of Etheria where people trade everything from black market surface artifacts to lab-grown steaks to handmade clothing fashioned from recycled materials. The bombing hit during peak hours, and the aftermath is still visible despite cleanup crews working around the clock. A hole in the platform floor, thankfully not large enough to compromise structural integrity but devastating nonetheless, serves as a dark memorial to those lost. Elena moves through the crowd, her Defense Force uniform creating a bubble of space around her, people's eyes showing a mix of respect, fear, and resentment. She's there to meet with Marcus Chen, an information broker who trades in secrets and rumors, someone who exists in the gray space between legal and criminal, between helpful and dangerous. Marcus operates out of a small shop wedged between a protein bar vendor and a water allocation office, a space barely large enough for two people that somehow contains what seems like hundreds of data drives, tablets, and mysterious devices that Elena doesn't want to know too much about. Marcus himself is thin, wiry, with a pale skin common to people who spend too much time in the city's interior levels away from the UV lamps that simulate sunlight. His eyes, though, are sharp, missing nothing, and when he sees Elena, his expression shifts from neutral to concerned. "Captain," he says quietly, gesturing her into the back room, an even smaller space that at least offers privacy. "I was hoping you wouldn't need to come personally." Elena leans against the wall, which vibrates slightly with the constant hum of the gravity generators, a sound so omnipresent that most people don't even hear it anymore. "You sent a priority message saying you had information about the bombing." "I'm here." "Talk." Marcus pulls out a tablet, encrypted of course, and shows her a series of communications he's intercepted. The bombing wasn't Grounder or Ascender terrorism, at least not in the way everyone assumed. It was a false flag operation, an attempt to manipulate the population into supporting more authoritarian control by the city council. The council is scared, Marcus explains, his voice barely above a whisper despite the room's soundproofing. They know the numbers, Elena. The oxygen production is declining by 0.3% annually. Water reclamation efficiency is dropping. Food production is barely keeping pace with population. The solar arrays need major maintenance that we don't have materials to complete properly. Etheria is dying, slowly but inevitably, and they're terrified that if people understand how dire things really are, there'll be complete social collapse. So they're creating external threats, enemies to rally against, anything to maintain unity and control. Elena feels ice forming in her stomach. She'd suspected resources were tight, everyone did, but managed decline was different from impending catastrophe. How long, she asks, though she's not sure she wants to know the answer. Best case scenario, with current trajectory and no major disasters, maybe 30 years before we hit cascade failure. Worst case, if we have another major systems failure like the oxygen farm contamination 3 years ago, maybe 10 years. But that's not the real problem, Captain. The real problem is that the council knows there's a solution, but it requires a choice nobody wants to make. Marcus shows her another file, this one containing survey data from the surface, information that should be impossible to obtain because nobody's been down there in decades. Apparently, that's not quite true. The council has been secretly sending drone missions, even a few manned expeditions in sealed suits, testing the toxicity levels, mapping safe zones, looking for any possibility of return. And they found something. There are pockets, small areas where the atmosphere has cleared enough to sustain human life, not comfortably, not without respiratory aids and protective gear, but sustainably. The largest pocket is over what used to be the Canadian Rockies, a valley where unique wind patterns and geological features have created a microclimate with breathable air. It could support maybe 5 million people, maybe, if they were willing to live in primitive conditions by Etheria standards. 5 million out of 30 million. The horrible mathematics of survival once again requiring decisions about who lives and who doesn't. Elena understands now why the council has been manipulating the population, creating division, because the alternative is telling 30 million people that only 1/6 of them have a chance at a real future, that the rest need to stay on Etheria and slowly die to give that minority a chance at survival on the surface. The council is planning to make the announcement in 3 months, Marcus continues. They're going to present it as an opportunity for volunteers, but everyone knows how that will really work. The useful people, the essential skills, the genetic diversity needed for a founding population, they'll be selected. Everyone else stays. And when that announcement comes, this city will tear itself apart. The bombing will look like a minor incident compared to what's coming. Elena leaves Marcus's shop with information she wishes she could unknow, walking through the market district in a daze, barely seeing the people around her, the vendors calling out their wares, children playing in the designated recreation spaces, couples holding hands, all of them living their lives unaware that those lives have an expiration date. She thinks about her position, her responsibilities, the oath she took to protect Etheria and its people. But how do you protect people from mathematics, from physics, from the simple reality that humans weren't meant to live in the sky and the systems supporting this impossible existence are breaking down? She finds herself at the edge of the market district, at one of the observation platforms that dot the city's perimeter, looking out at the cloud layer that perpetually shrouds the world below. Somewhere down there, beneath miles of toxic fog, is the Earth that was, the continents and oceans, the ruins of cities and civilizations, the bones of billions who didn't survive the transition. And somewhere down there, if Marcus's information is correct, is a small pocket of hope, room for some but not all, salvation that requires sacrifice from those who don't get to be saved. Her communicator buzzes, pulling her from dark thoughts. It's her daughter, Maya, calling from the education center on level 156. Maya is 17, born in Etheria, part of the generation that has no memory of the surface, no frame of reference for what humanity lost. She's brilliant, gifted in systems engineering, exactly the kind of person who would be on any survival selection list, and Elena feels guilt wash over her at the relief that thought brings. "Mom, are you coming to my presentation?" Maya's voice is bright, excited, untouched by the weight Elena carries. "I figured out a way to increase oxygen production by 4% using a new algae cultivation technique. Dr. Ramirez says it could be revolutionary. 4%. Enough to buy them a few more years maybe, to delay the inevitable slightly." Elena forces enthusiasm into her voice. "I'll be there, sweetheart. Wouldn't miss it for anything." She ends the call and makes a decision. The council needs to know their secret is compromised, but more than that, they need to know that their current path leads nowhere good. There has to be another option, some solution they haven't considered, because she refuses to accept a future where she has to choose between her daughter's life and the lives of millions of others. The council chamber is located at the apex of the spire, above even the solar arrays, a circular room with transparent walls that offer 360-degree views of sky, clouds, and on rare clear days, brief glimpses of the toxic landscape far below. The 7 council members sit in their designated positions, each representing a different aspect of Etheria's governance, resources, engineering, medical, security, agriculture, science, and population management. Elena has clearance to request emergency sessions, and the fact that she's used that power now, at 0300 hours local time, tells them this is serious. Council Chair Amora Okafor, a 72-year-old woman who is one of the few remaining people who held positions of power before the Exodus, studies Elena with eyes that have seen too much, eyes that carry the weight of decisions that haunt her. "Captain Vasquez, this better be important enough to warrant interrupting sleep cycles." Elena doesn't waste time with diplomacy. She lays out everything Marcus told her, watching their faces shift from confusion to alarm to resignation, confirming the truth of it. When she finishes, silence hangs heavy in the room, broken only by the whisper of wind against the transparent walls. Finally, Councillor James Park, head of engineering, speaks. "We were going to brief you next week, Captain, as part of preparations for managing the population response. Yes, everything you've been told is accurate. Yes, we've found limited survivable space on the surface. Yes, it's insufficient for our entire population. And yes, we've been struggling with how to handle this without causing complete social breakdown. If you have alternative suggestions, we're genuinely eager to hear them." Elena has had 3 hours to think about this, 3 hours to consider options while walking through the sleeping city, looking at the people whose lives hang in the balance. "What if we don't choose?" she says quietly. "What if we present the information truthfully, lay out the mathematics clearly, and let people self-select? Some will want to take the chance on the surface despite the hardships. Others will prefer to stay in Etheria for whatever time remains. It won't be neat or efficient, but it preserves human dignity, gives people agency over their own fates instead of treating them like cargo to be sorted." Councillor Maria Santos, head of population management, shakes her head. "We've run the simulations, Captain. If we give people choice, the wrong distribution happens. Everyone who's useful wants to stay in comfort up here. Everyone who's desperate but not necessarily equipped for survival wants to go down. We end up with a surface population that can't sustain itself and a sky population that's still too large for our declining resources. Choice sounds noble, but it leads to total failure. Then we change what we're choosing between, Elena counters, an idea crystallizing as she speaks. The problem is we're thinking of this as sky versus ground, Etheria versus settlement. What if we're asking the wrong question? This city was built in sections, modular platforms connected together. What if we don't maintain Etheria as a single entity? What if we break it apart, create multiple smaller sky cities, each supporting a smaller population more efficiently? Meanwhile, we establish the ground settlement not as a refugee camp but as a proper colony with support from the sky cities. Resources flow both ways. The surface produces things we can't make up here, raw materials, certain crops, space for manufacturing that's too dangerous in a floating city. The sky cities provide technology, protected space for vulnerable populations, a backup in case the surface becomes toxic again. We become a distributed civilization, sky and ground working together instead of competing. The council members exchange glances, a mix of skepticism and reluctant interest. It's Chair Okafor who finally responds. That would require completely restructuring our society, Captain. The technical challenges alone are enormous. Splitting Etheria without catastrophic failures, maintaining communication and trade between separated populations, coordinating resources across distances. And it still doesn't solve the fundamental problem that we don't have enough resources to support everyone indefinitely. No, Elena agrees, but it gives us options and redundancy. Right now, we're one critical failure away from extinction, all our eggs in one basket. Distributed, we're resilient. Some communities might fail, but others can survive and learn from those failures. And maybe, just maybe, if we're not spending all our resources maintaining one massive doomed city, we have capacity to invest in long-term solutions. Research into atmosphere cleaning, into adaptation techniques, into finding other survivable pockets. The current path guarantees slow death. This path at least offers a chance at survival for everyone, even if that survival looks different than what we're used to. The debate that follows lasts for hours, technical objections raised and addressed, political implications explored, risks weighed against the certain doom of continuing current trajectory. As dawn simulation begins across Etheria, as the UV lamps slowly brighten to mimic sunrise and 30 million people wait to start another day, the council reaches a tentative decision. They'll form a committee, run simulations, consult with engineers and social scientists, but they'll seriously explore Elena's proposal as an alternative to the original plan. Over the following months, Etheria transforms from a unified city into something more complex and uncertain. The announcement, when it comes, shocks the population but also galvanizes them in unexpected ways. People begin voluntarily organizing into groups based on preference and skill, those willing to face the hardships of surface life forming pioneer teams, those committed to sky living forming maintenance collectives focused on sustaining smaller platforms. The engineering core works around the clock designing separation protocols, ways to split Etheria into 6 independent platforms without triggering catastrophic failures. It's dangerous work, unprecedented, and there are setbacks and failures that cost lives. An entire residential section, level 203, depressurizes during a separation test, killing everyone in that sector before emergency bulkheads can seal. The tragedy nearly derails the entire project, But Maya, Elena's daughter, leads a student movement arguing that those deaths make it even more important to continue, that giving up now would mean they died for nothing. The first successful separation happens 9 months after Elena's meeting with the council. Platform Delta, supporting 3 million people, detaches from the main city and establishes independent floating position 10 miles away. The moment of separation is terrifying, the platform shuddering as its own gravity generators take full load, people clutching furniture and each other as everything adjusts to independent operation. But it holds, it works, and when communication confirms that Platform Delta is stable and sustainable, cheers erupt across both populations. Over the next 2 years, Etheria ceases to exist as a single entity, becoming instead a constellation of 6 sky platforms, each supporting between 3 and 7 million people, each with its own character and specialization. Platform Alpha focuses on food production with massive hydroponic farms. Platform Beta becomes the industrial center, manufacturing and heavy engineering. Platform Gamma houses the medical facilities and research labs. And so on, each finding its niche, each learning to exist independently while maintaining trade and communication with the others. Meanwhile, the surface expedition launches with 5 million volunteers, a mix of idealists, adventurers, and people who simply can't stomach the idea of spending their entire lives in recycled air. Elena watches the descent vehicles launch from Platform Alpha, dozens of reinforced transports designed to survive the trip through the toxic atmosphere to the survivable zone. Maya is on one of those transports, having insisted that her engineering skills were needed for the ground colony, and Elena's heart breaks and swells with pride simultaneously. She watches through telescopic displays as the transports disappear into the clouds, beginning a journey that will take 3 days through layers of atmospheric poison, acid storms, and electromagnetic interference that makes communication impossible. 3 days of not knowing if her daughter survives, if any of them survive, if this grand experiment in human resilience is brilliant or catastrophically foolish. On the 3rd day, a message arrives, garbled at first but growing stronger as relay satellites establish connection. Maya's voice, tired but elated, reporting successful landing in the Canadian Valley Colony site. The air is breathable with filters, the temperature cold but manageable, the radiation levels acceptable for long-term habitation. They've begun construction of the first permanent structures, using materials dropped in advanced supply runs combined with local stone and timber from the hardy trees that somehow survived. It's not easy, it's not comfortable, but it's possible, and that possibility changes everything. The ground colonists become pioneers in the truest sense, building a civilization from scratch while staying connected to their sky-dwelling cousins. Trade routes established between surface and sky, raw materials, and exotic foods going up, technology and manufactured goods coming down. 5 years after the separation, Elena stands again at an observation deck, but this time on Platform Alpha, looking down at the cloud layer and knowing that somewhere below, her daughter is raising Elena's granddaughter in the fresh air of Earth. The platforms have stabilized, populations adjusting to their new distributed existence. Birth rates have increased as people feel hope for the future rather than despair. The oxygen production problem has been solved through a combination of Maya's improved algae technique and the reduction in population pressure on each platform. New technologies are emerging from the collaboration between sky and ground populations, insights that come from having different environmental challenges driving innovation. The grounders and ascenders have mostly dissolved as political factions, their apocalyptic visions replaced by a more nuanced understanding that humanity's future isn't either-or but both, and a species learning to thrive in multiple environments simultaneously. But challenges remain, constant and demanding. The platforms require endless maintenance, every system monitored constantly for signs of degradation. The ground colony faces its own struggles with crop failures, radiation spikes, conflicts with the harsh environment. Not everyone survives, not every community succeeds, but the distributed nature of the population means that individual failures don't doom the species. When Platform Epsilon suffers a major power failure that kills 2,000 people before backups engage, the other platforms provide resources and support for recovery. When the ground colony experiences a toxic fog incursion that forces evacuation of an outlying settlement, Sky platforms provide temporary refuge until the danger passes. Humanity has become resilient not through individual strength but through collective adaptation, through accepting that survival in the post-toxic world requires flexibility, cooperation, and the willingness to help each other even when resources are scarce. Elena is older now, grayer, moving a bit slower, but still serving as head of Alpha Platform's defense force. She's training her replacement, a young woman named Sarah who was born in Etheria and grew up during the transition, who knows no other life than this distributed existence between sky and ground. Teaching Sarah, sharing the lessons learned through crisis and adaptation, Elena realizes that they've accomplished something remarkable. They've brought humanity a future, not by conquering their problems or finding easy solutions, but by accepting complexity, embracing difficult choices, and refusing to give up even when the mathematics seemed impossible. The last city in the sky became 6 cities, became a ground colony, became a new model for human civilization that may be humanity's path forward not just on Earth but wherever we go in the cosmos. As the synthetic sunset begins on Platform Alpha, Elena sends a message to Maya on the surface, their daily ritual of sharing news and staying connected across the vertical miles that separate them. She tells her daughter about Sarah's progress, about the new solar array expansion project, about small victories and minor crises, the mundane details that make up life in any community. And Maya responds with stories of the colony, of her daughter's first words, of new agricultural successes, of challenges overcome and problems still unsolved. The conversation flows between sky and ground, between mother and daughter, between 2 branches of humanity learning to live in a world that tried to kill them and somehow, against all odds, surviving. This is the story of the last city in the sky, how it became many cities, how humanity learned that survival sometimes means letting go of what we were to become what we need to be, how we found hope in distribution rather than unity, in adaptation rather than resistance. Thank you for joining us on Phantom Futures, where we explore the incredible resilience of human spirit and the unexpected paths we might walk among the clouds and beyond.